The story goes that there was a Jew who was killed, and no one knew who the killer was. They wanted to find out who the murderer was. So the Jews brought the entire story of this murder to the prophet Moses to see his insight. The prophet Moses turned to God. There was a dialogue in which the prophet Moses played the role of mediator between the Jews and God. God would give his commands to Moses, and Moses would relay those commands to the Jews. The Jews would then convey their questions to Moses, and Moses would pass those questions on to God. This continued until the story concluded with the revelation of who the killer was. And so on. The truth that concerns me in this story, which I will tell you, is not an interpretation of what happened at all. What concerns me is the state of dialogue between the Jews, Moses, and God, and between God, Moses, and the Jews. So we will see. I will read the verses to you at about a minute or two at most, so you have an idea, or for those who haven't read the verses or seen the Quran, they can at least listen and understand how the story unfolds with us. And I hope this time, of course, that the sound is clear and the picture is clear. The truth is, when Moses said to his people, "Indeed, God commands you to slaughter a cow," they said, "Do you take us in jest?" He said, "I seek refuge in God from being among ignorant." They said, "Call upon your Lord for us to make clear to us what it is." He said, "He says it is a cow neither old nor virgin, but of middle age. So do what you are commanded." They said, "Call upon your Lord for us to make clear to us what its color is." He said, "He says it is a yellow cow, bright in color, pleasing to the beholders." They said, "Call upon your Lord for us to make clear to us what it is, for indeed all cows look alike to us, and indeed we, if Allah wills, will be guided." He said, "He says it is a cow neither trained to plow the earth nor to irrigate the field, sound without blemish." They said, "Now you have come with the truth." So they slaughtered her, but they could hardly do it. And recall when you killed a man and disputed over it, but Allah was to bring out that which you were concealing. So we said, "Strike him with part of it." Thus does Allah bring the dead to life, and he shows you his signs that you might reason. Thank you. What happened is that all the interpreters I mentioned are focusing on one point, that God, it happened that a Jew was killed, and the Jews wanted to know who the killer was, so they turned to Moses. Moses then turned to God, and God told them to follow a cow. Here, the interpreter's explanations made things difficult for his messenger. They asked, "What does this cow look like? What color is this cow? How old is this cow?" And God kept answering their questions, and they made the matter difficult for themselves. All these stories, in truth, this matter, these are reflections. The scholars' reflections on the matter and their explanations and clarifications, not interpretations, because we said before that interpretation is the same as exegesis, and only God knows the exegesis. All these reflections around the matter are not what concern me in this story. What concerns me in the story are the questions raised in it. Is the state of dialogue and debate between God, Moses, and the Jews. From the Jews' questions to Moses, and from Moses to God, then God's response to Moses, and from Moses to the Jews. It is this argumentative aspect that primarily concerns me. So here, the question is, does God know that a Jew will kill another? Yes, he certainly knows. God knows. Okay, another question. Did God want this Jew to kill another Jew? No. God does not want anyone to kill another, nor does he push anyone to kill another unless there is an opinion that says God wanted this Jew to kill the other Jew, and they must provide evidence for this intention. Does God know that the Jews will ask these questions? Yes. God knows that the Jews will ask those questions, but did God want them to ask those questions? No, the killer killed by his own will, completely independent of God's will, and the questioners asked Moses those questions by their own will, completely independent of God's will. This is what I personally imagine. So there are two completely separate wills. God's will on one side, and the will of the Jews on the other side. Both wills are completely separate. Here we emphasize and say, because we will emphasize this a lot as we go through the verses of the Quran, that this Quran is a natural result of two completely independent wills, because if the Jewish man had not killed his colleague, those verses would not have appeared. Who would they have been revealed to? You have to think about this. As long as God did not command it, and as long as the Jewish man killed his colleague of his own free will, that's where the story began. Meaning, humans in general, whether Jewish or not, humans at that time and in that place, and according to those events, for things, it was the human who initiated the interaction on earth. It was the human who initiated the action, it was the human who initiated the action on earth. Then this action moved to the prophet Moses, and from the prophet Moses, it moved to God. Then, pay attention to the word then. The response from God came to this action. So, the action was undertaken by the human, which was the act of killing and the act of questioning all of this. It was indeed undertaken by the Jewish man in this specific place and at this particular time. And the action notably moved from earth to heaven through the prophet Moses, as it is historically recorded. And the second stage, this is the first stage, the stage of action. Therefore, we say that the Quran began with a human, earthly action and ended with a divine, heavenly statement. After the action occurred and moved from the earth to the prophet Moses, and from the prophet Moses to God. Here began the role of God. Here began the divine response to the human action. Here is the story. Here is the issue. We must understand that if those events had not occurred, those verses would not have been revealed. You must understand this with utmost clarity. Thus, humans and God are indeed partners in this Quranic text. Humans through their actions, and God through his words. That is why here, let me emphasize a point, which is the claim of the eternity of the Quran. That the Quran is ancient, and that it was preserved in the preserved tablet, and all of this means that what we have just discussed about this dialectical relationship between earth and heaven, between humans and God, completely negates the notion of the eternity and antiquity of the Quran. The Quran was fresh and new, paralleling and interacting with events moment by moment, event by event, and movement by movement. Honestly, the issue of the Jews asking certain questions and being strict with themselves, and God responding to them, all of these things, well, it was possible for God to respond to Moses from the beginning and tell him to say any response to them. I mean, people, a person sweats from their questions. People kept saying to him, "Tell us how old it is. Tell us what color it is. Tell us if it can plow or not, because many cows look alike to us. So, in this situation, it was possible for God to tell him to say any cow. I mean, someone might ask me a question, and I could respond by saying, choose anything, it's fine, there's no problem. But I'm not talking about that part. I'm not discussing what happened, why it happened, or how it happened. I'm talking about the aspect of debate, the debate of the action itself between humans and God, between earth and heaven, as the Quran is a result of an event, that is, an action on earth at a specific time, orchestrated by human beings, and then the divine reaction in response to this particular human action followed. I hope things are clear, meaning that heaven was not separate from earth. God was not in his highest place, sitting in his heaven or in his place, to send down verses to the people, or on humans, meaning on Prophet Moses or Prophet Muhammad or any verses of any kind. This is not true. God was interacting with human actions on earth. That is the truth. If we do not understand this, and if we understand that the Quran was revealed completely separately, there are, of course, other verses that certainly did not have a reason for revelation. They were simply an invitation. They were simply advice. They were a specific message. For example, when it says, and say, work, for God will see your deeds, and his messenger, and the believers. Okay, so who is this directed to? This is an invitation from God to his servants, to emphasize the value of work, and the importance of work. When it says, and that man will have nothing except what he strives for, this is also considered encouragement for a person to strive in the world, earn a living, and so on. This is the issue. Honestly, I'm not here to interpret the words because they explain themselves, or to clarify the words. I'm sorry, not interpret. Clarify the words because they are self-explanatory. But in any case, what matters to me is just this part. As for those who want to refer to the interpretation of the verses, the interpretation is available everywhere, in libraries, on the internet, and in all places, in references and everything. We are here concerning the dialectical relationship between earth and heaven, and that this Quran is the result of a joint human divine action. I truly thank you. And I hope you will share this channel with your friends and on your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other pages so that we can spread awareness together.